Bonsoir, salam alaikum à tous. Est-ce que vous m'entendez? J'ai besoin de commentaires pour savoir. Tout le monde va bien, vous m'entendez? On fait des petits tests techniques avant de commencer le live. Tout le monde m'entend? Veuillez commenter dans le chat pour que je le sache. Hello Thelma, ok, génial. Thelma, tu m'entends? Tu peux faire la porte-parole des gens dans le chat? Ok, génial. Bonsoir à tous, salam alaikum. Bienvenue dans ce second live de Critical Muslim Studies. On va aujourd'hui discuter, répondre à vos questions autour d'une question qui est assez intéressante à aborder. Est-ce que je dis ça parce que j'ai participé au projet? Je suis pas très objective, mais quand même, c'était vraiment cool. Donc là, je vais laisser la parole à Joachim, qui va vous présenter le projet, les Critical Muslim Studies. Ensuite, je reprendrai la parole pour vous parler de Ras Hanout et du côté artistique du projet.
Merci, Sohaila. Salut tout le monde. Salam alaikum. Good evening. I sincerely hope you're still energized despite everything. Looking out of the window to the prospect of the reopening public space as springtime is slowly but surely coming our way. So it's a pleasure to welcome and introduce this evening again. Tonight we will engage, as Suhaila said, in an exercise in self-criticism and talk about the cost of research. It's a second evening in a series of theater lectures on Ras TV that tackles different questions from a critical Muslim perspective. It's a growing perspective in academia, but also in society and public debates in Belgium and beyond at large. So it's inspired by a shared need to open up a space to explore possible relations between, on the one hand, decolonial thinking, and on the other, studies in Islam and the Islamicate. So Ghent University and the research group MENARG, the Free University of Brussels, Cheikh Fatima Mernissi, and the Catholic University of Leuven, the IMMRC, are joining forces with a Brussels-based theater company, Ras El Hanout. So together with professors of the three universities, Nadia Fadil, Iman Leshkar, and Sami Zemni, Ras El Hanout has prepared different theatrical interventions with a group of young enthusiast theater makers to understand how Islam is not only a religious and spiritual tradition, but also a possible framework for a decolonial perspective. So we have invited different scholars in the field. Last month, we had the chance to speak with Salman Said. Next time, on April 1st, we'll speak with Shirin Amir Mouazami. But tonight, we have the honor to have with us Maysoon Soukariye to talk about the cost of research and processes of over-research. Normally, we would be sitting in the artist-run space L'Épicerie in the heart of Molenbeek. But considering the still very viral situation, the theatrical interventions are pre-recorded and the talks are taking place online as we speak. So again, I'm really looking forward to watch with you the result of this really inspiring and joyful working process tonight with Sami Zemni, Shirin Amir Mouazami, and the actors of Ras El Hanout. So Suhaila, I give the word back to you now.
Donc, si vous êtes sur Ras TV, vous savez peut-être ou peut-être pas ce qu'est Ras El Hanout. Donc, je vais juste le rappeler en quelques mots. Ras El Hanout, c'est un acteur de démocratie et de démocratisation culturelle qui mène des activités d'éducation permanente, d'expression à la créativité et de création artistique amateur et professionnelle dans une optique d'empowerment et de cohésion sociale. Tout ça, c'est des beaux mots pour dire qu'à Ras El Hanout, on s'amuse et on fait des choses utiles. Donc, en parlant de choses utiles, en parlant de Ras Hanout, derrière Ras Hanout, il y a des personnes que j'aimerais remercier. Tout d'abord, les personnes qui ont écrit la pièce de théâtre que vous allez voir aujourd'hui, donc à savoir Camélia Bendodu, Meriem Bouaziz, Ayman Genaou et Mariam Diallo, qui est l'autre responsable du projet, mais qui n'est pas présente aujourd'hui. Et bien évidemment, les personnes qui vont jouer sur scène, pour le coup, c'est les mêmes personnes, à l'exception du seul homme de l'équipe qui est sur scène, c'est Abgar Toumaïsan, pardon. Donc merci à eux, merci également aux chercheurs sans qui le projet n'aurait pas pu voir le jour. Donc maintenant, aujourd'hui, là, je vais laisser la parole à un des acteurs principaux du live aujourd'hui, à savoir Sami Zamni, qui va discuter avec Maysoun Soukarié, l'auteur, l'une des autrices, pardon, du texte sur lequel on s'est basé pour faire la pièce. Voilà.
Bonsoir tout le monde, salam alaikum. Je suis très content de pouvoir vous accueillir ce soir virtuellement pour cette deuxième soirée donc dans le cadre des Critical Muslim Studies. Je suis Sami Zamni, ce soir votre hôte, et pendant le reste de la journée, je suis normalement professeur en sciences politiques et sociales à l'université de Gand, comme Joachim et Soheila ont déjà dit. Ce soir, nous allons donc aborder le sujet des groupes surétudiés dans le monde académique. Quelles sont en effet les conséquences de ces nombreuses visites que des chercheurs font chez des groupes qu'ils veulent connaître et faire connaître? Quel impact ont ces visites sur les communautés qu'ils étudient? Quelles sont les conséquences de la recherche pour les populations que les chercheurs prétendent venir en aide? À quel coût sont les recherches menées? Le problème des communautés surétudiées, ironiquement, est lui-même un sujet sous-étudié dans les sciences sociales. Mais nous allons changer cela ce soir avec notre invité principal, Maysoun Soukarié. Good evening, Maysoun.
Hello. Good evening.
Good evening, Maysoun, and thank you for being with us live from London tonight. Could you briefly introduce yourself to our audience tonight?
Okay, I am Maysoun Soukarié. I teach at King's College London. I am Lebanese. I come from Beirut, basically, and I witnessed so many ways of researchers in my city. So I got interested in the relation of researchers and research of the political economy of research, and this has become one of the areas of the studies I am really interested in. I have to say I'm not really a good public speaker, but I think like you have been doing really wonderful work, and so I couldn't really say no to that. So thank you for inviting me, but don't expect so much from me. So.
No. Thank you, Maysoun, and I'm quite sure you will do a perfect job. We already had the time before to talk to you, and you had so many compelling examples and stories to tell about your research that I'm quite sure the audience will really like it and connect to it.
I confirm.
There you
that
go.
was private.
All right. Ce soir, donc, nous allons aborder les problèmes liés à la sur-recherche de certaines communautés, et nous allons nous concentrer sur l'expérience que Maysoun a vécue dans un quartier particulièrement surreprésenté dans la recherche, c'est-à-dire le camp de réfugiés palestiniens de Shatila à Beyrouth au Liban. Sans attendre plus longtemps, mesdames et messieurs, regardons ensemble comment la relation entre la recherche et les promesses de changement social peut ou peuvent devenir problématiques. Envoyez la première bande, s'il vous plaît.
Salam alaikum.
Salam alaikum.
Alors voilà, comme promis, voici Ahmed qui vit au camp avec ses 7 enfants depuis plusieurs années déjà.
Bonjour, Christian Loiseau, enchanté.
يقول لنا اسمها كريستيان تايرون.
تايرون؟ متشرفين كريستيان. ادخل. مرحبا بك. إفحال كما في بيتك. الشيء حلو ولا لا؟
Ah, hello, شكرا خلافي. Je me demande si vous voulez du thé avec ou sans sucre.
Avec, s'il vous plaît, merci. Merci. Bien, commençons. Parlez-moi un peu de votre vie au sein du camp en tant que femme.
أطفالي صغار جدا وأنا كبيرة في السن. ليس سهلا علي إدارة كل هذا. مثلا لقد رأيتم بابي مكسور كسر من طرف العساكر ومن المستحيل علي إصلاحه. لا يمكنني ذلك لا جسديا ولا ماليا والحمد لله على كل حال.
Est-ce que je pourrais simplement prendre la porte en photo?
نعم انطلق. انظر كل يمكنني فعله هو استرجاع المواد النسيج القديم ليكون له مظهر خاص.
Salam alaikum. Alors voilà, comme promis, voici Ahmed qui vit au camp avec ses 7 enfants depuis de nombreuses années déjà.
Bernard le boucher.
يقول لنا اسمهن برنار وهو جزار.
جزار؟ متشرفين، ادخل افعل كما في بيتك. شيء حلو ولا لا؟
حلو شكرا خلافي. Je me demande si vous voulez du thé sucré ou non.
Avec, s'il vous plaît. Merci. Bon, commençons. Parlez-moi de votre vie au sein du camp en tant que femme. Comment arrivez-vous à faire grandir 7 enfants dans une situation pareille?
أطفالي صغار جدا وأنا كبيرة في السن. ليس سهلا علي إدارة كل هذا. مثلا لقد رأيتم بابي مكسور كسر من طرف العساكر ومن إصلاحه علي ومن المستحيل إصلاحه علي. لا يمكنك ذلك لا جسديا ولا ماليا والحمد لله على كل حال.
Est-ce que je peux prendre la porte en photo?
نعم انطلق. انظر انظر لا يمكنني فعله هو استرجاع مواد النسيج القديم ليكون مظهر خاص.
Salam alaikum.
Bonjour.
Alors voilà, comme promis, voici Ahmed qui vit au camp avec ses 7 enfants depuis de nombreuses années déjà.
Aurélien Legras, enchanté.
يقول لنا اسمهن أوريليا حبة.
فرانسي تفضل.
Elle vous souhaite la bienvenue.
Merci.
شكرا خالتي. شيء بيجوز لي سكر من فضلك؟ شكرا.
Juste une petite question avant de commencer. Je suis un peu perturbé depuis mon entrée. Pourquoi il y a des rideaux à la place de la porte? Est-ce que c'est culturel ou autre?
هذا الباب كسر من طرف العساكر منذ 3 سنوات. من المستحيل علي إصلاحه. لا يمكنني ذلك لا جسديا ولا ماليا. خذ لها صورة إذا كان هذا.
Salam alaikum. Alors voilà, comme convenu, voici Mohamed qui vit au camp avec...
لا شكرا إنك تفضحني. أنا إنسان عندي أطفال وعندهم شرفهم. ماذا فعلت لمساعدتي في حالتي؟ لن نساعدك في أبحاثك.
Bon, avec tout ce qu'elle a vécu et avec son âge, elle n'a plus vraiment toute sa tête. Mais bon, si vous le souhaitez, je peux vous faire rencontrer une autre famille du camp qui en fait se trouve...
Merci beaucoup pour ce premier extrait. Pour le public qui nous suit, n'hésitez pas à mettre vos commentaires, vos remarques et vos questions dans le chat. On va essayer évidemment de les prendre en compte. Okay, Maysoon, we just saw a very nice video clip. And what did we actually see? Did you recognize this setting in your own fieldwork?
Yes, actually, it's about a woman in Shatila camp I really know and I really respect. She was a single mom of 6 children and she lived in a 2-room house with a broken door. And she was, she really put so much into education because she thought that, like all Palestinians, that education is a way of liberation and at least, like, you know, to liberate her kids from the dire condition in the camps. So her children were sponsored by an NGO, right? Because they had like the sponsorship schemes where you can like sponsor a kid in a school. So all her children were sponsored by this NGO. And and this was almost the only source of money for the family, besides something from here and there, as she would say. But despite really the bad conditions, she was like the most dignified, maybe person I've ever met, woman I've ever met in my life. She was always smiling. She was very generous. So, you know, she likes to greet people, offer them. She used to run and even like bring them Pepsi and cola, not even offering them the tea with sugar or no sugar. And she was really articulate and very articulate, very generous, and she would talk from her heart. So this made her some sort of like good research material, if you want to say, and it was also good publicity for the NGO. So they used to bring one researcher after the other, which the clip really, showed well. One researcher after the other, and then they all want to talk about the living condition of the house and the broken door, and then mostly taking pictures of the broken door. So, so what happens later is that. At the beginning, she was really generous, and she truly believed that, you know, if she talks to these researchers, something will change. Not for herself. She was an activist herself, like all her life. She was an activist with the Palestinian Liberation Organization, and she was a woman fighter too. And so she truly believed, like, you know, these researchers are like the old solidarity groups, you know, the political parties that used to come from Cuba to Japan to like coming to the camp to as solidarity, not for research. So she used to give from her heart, speak really, like give whatever she has to the researchers. But after a while, she started to feel like, you know, they all focus on the same topic. and they want to hear about the misery. And over again, they are taking pictures of her broken door. So in a way, she started to be so frustrated from, the researcher that, over like, I'm talking about like 5 years, 6 years of people coming and talking to her, because she became like this, she became like one of the women that the NGO will always lead the researchers to. And then we know that the NGOs are gatekeepers, and she can't say no to the NGOs, like, because they sponsor her kids. After a while, like, she got so frustrated because there is some sort of she's exposing herself and her family in a way that she wouldn't do, but she was asked from the NGOs that she needs to talk about these issues because there are so many promises that this will help. And of course, there are also issues of like they have power over her. But she felt also tied, frustrated because she's tied herself. She used to say, my hands are tied because I cannot say no to the NGOs. Otherwise, I'm not free to say no to them, because otherwise I would have kicked all these researchers long time ago. They aren't like the solidarity people that used to come in the past. So, and then, it's like she was exposed because already her house was exposed because there was that broken door. And then, taking pictures of that broken door also felt like more invasive and exposing her even more. And like one time, her frustration from, no privacy, she told me, like, I don't know what they want to ask more in the camp. Like, in a bit, they are going to go around and ask they still haven't asked the married woman, on which side they sleep with their husband when they are in bed. So, and then, this feeling of frustration, of being oppressed and so on, I think the door can be here like a metaphor for the frustration. It's like the door of the camp. It's not like about her broken door and the promises of like, fixing her own door. It was, the many researchers coming over time and the camp situation are still the same. Nothing has changed. And the focus is always on the bad condition without changing them, and not asking about her life story, which was full of amazing activism and struggle for a cause she believed in. So yes, I do see that. I do see well, she wasn't free as the actress in the clip, because the actress could say at the end, like, get her frustration out and kick the researcher. She never did.
She never did, unfortunately.
No.
And you point to an important issue. There is not only the relationship with the researcher that comes in, but also with the NGOs who guide the researcher to that house, and always to that same woman and the same broken door. So in a sense, there is also a feeling, I think, of Ahmed, that she is tied, and like you said, her hands were tied. And, do you think there is a willingness then to keep her in that situation? Because this sensationalist approach, where you can watch her misery, as it were, and her poor conditions that never change, is a way of the NGO to keep itself alive and keep on getting funding from abroad. But, what about the researcher?
Yeah, well, I think like this is a really good question, because yes, first of all, you can see that there was a coalition between the NGOs and the researchers, because first of all, just to give you a little bit of a background, to get access to the camp, a researcher should go through an NGO, and the NGO will take a permission from the popular committee. So and then, once you arrive to the NGO, you do some work like translate or write proposal or help in a little bit, and they give you access. So they are one of the gatekeepers to the camp. And they give you access to people they work with. so they are their clients in a way, because they pay, like, you know, in this case, they were sponsoring her kids. And so there is a coalition here between, or a common interest between the researcher and the NGOs. The NGOs want to keep the misery going because this is how they get the funds. And the researchers, I don't know why, but there is something in research that really, we like extreme, not all of us, like extreme dire situation and dire poverty. And we like, somehow there is a feeling that if, you know, our research will be more important or more dramatic or whatever if we are focusing on the poor people and the marginalized. And there is a history to that, as we know, because it's the studying of others, the poor, the marginalized in other places. And then it's like we say, they used to say in the camp that they make a life out of our researching our misery.
Mm-hmm.
And then, you know, so the gaze of the researcher is always focused on the misery for so many reasons, on the marginalized. Nobody wants to study the rich. I don't know why. Maybe they don't find their stories interesting. But there are, you know, so many ethical questions to be asked here. Like, why do we feel that? Like, why are we? Why are we really focused on, or we, like, why is our gaze always on the marginalized and the poor? So questions about, like, you know, why do we invest in finding these people? Like, there is a need to check our attitudes and behavior when it comes to this. And then, of course, you know, the more poor you are, the more sexy you are for the NGOs and for the researcher. And then also this creates so many representation of the camps that the camp president were really angry at. And I mentioned that, you know, the woman used to be angry, like, she was a fighter when she was like in high school. She used to go from Beirut to Baalbek and, you know, try to get funds for the PLO. Then she fought in the war of the camps. And so she's like really a strong woman. Why only focus on that broken door and so on? So, yeah, so there is this clientelist
there is
thing going on. Yes.
There is indeed that question of money. Would it be populist of me to say that if all the money that has gone to the gatekeepers, because the gatekeepers, you know, get money from the researcher to get access to the camp and access to, for example, Ahmed, but she never saw the money.
Yeah, well, of course, because you know, at that time, they can't even talk to their sponsors. So this was like something that they always told me about. Like, you know, if you are sponsored by someone, the NGO won't give you, you don't know who is sending your kids the money. So there is like this block. And of course, you know, if you know, the NGOs acted as gatekeepers. So I don't think the researcher could give the money if they have money to the NGOs. And mostly they, in return of getting access to their subjects, they did more like translation, proposal writing, stuff like that for the NGO. But I think this brings us to the issue of promises that also the researchers make for the community we study. There are all these explicit and implicit, implied promises we make. So, for example, there were like researchers who would promise visas, like, you know, I will get you access to the university and then you can get a visa. And of course, you know, everybody wanted to leave. They had no civil rights and so on. There were promises so there were like, you know, explicit promises that also we can fix the door if we take picture and show it, and then so there will be people who will be interested and then they will come fix the door. But there are also implied promises, I think, about like we can give you voice and we will make others hear your stories, right? So if we are giving voice to the community. And for someone like her, like Ahmed, as I quote her in the paper, she had like some history of when she spoke about the condition and she spoke, there were solidarity movements. So she believed a little bit that if we can talk about the issues, then things will be better, right? So we need to be, as researchers, really aware of what promises we are making, why we are making these promises, and if there are promises we are not making, why we are making these promises. So there are these issues at stake here. Yes.
And do you think we should, as researchers, make promises, and can we really live up to that?
I mean, like what? I mean, I think being honest is the most important thing. You don't have to make promises, but it's, as I said, there are all these clientelist relationships that you come, and then I don't know, why do you need to make promises? Even like promising that knowledge is going to solve the problem of the refugees is not true, right? So it's not like, we promise. I can say that I am doing my research. I prefer, like, we should be honest. It's okay to do research just because you want to do a PhD. What happens after our research is done, nobody knows, right? So research take a life of its own. So no, we shouldn't be doing research. We should be thinking about the role of research to to the community we study, but not like making promises to individuals.
Mm-hmm. Indeed. Thank you. I think we're going to come back to the issue of alternatives and other ways of carrying out the research. But perhaps it's time to move on to a second clip so that we can bring in some other themes.
Ce serait vraiment bien que les chercheurs puissent interroger les femmes du camp pour un atelier de groupe. Et puis ça vous permettrait d'avoir plus de médicaments. Il me semble que votre nièce était malade. Je suis tellement heureux de vous voir aussi nombreuses à cet atelier. Cela montre que vous avez compris l'intérêt que ça allait porter. Vous avez tout à y gagner. Aujourd'hui, nous allons parler d'un sujet qui vous touche ou touchera toutes. C'est la ménopause.
اكتئاب الكبير سوف نتكلم عن سنة أكبر اكتئاب الكبير
نعم تلك سنة بدينا فيها وهنينا نتمنى دائما نعود
Revenir Non, la ménopause est irréversible.
يقول لن تستطيعوا الهدى أبدا
يقلل من شأننا اللهم هنا وعزنتنا لا تضعف.
Écoutez, vous devez comprendre, c'est un cap difficile à franchir, mais ce n'est pas la fin du monde. Ça vous ouvre de nouvelles possibilités, c'est une nouvelle vie qui s'ouvre à vous.
يقول هكذا ستتعود عليها.
ماذا أحضرتني؟ أعني أمريكي بكل تحقيق نعرف هما يضافه.
لا خالتي إنه فرنسي ولكن سأنزله في مكانه. Vous n'avez pas honte de détruire leurs espoirs ainsi?
Écoutez, je ne vais pas leur mentir, c'est la dure réalité de la vie. D'ailleurs, est-ce que...
ولكن ما علاقة هذا بالموضوع؟ وكيف تجرؤ على طرح هذه الأسئلة؟ هذا ازدراء. إذا أحد سألكم سؤال مثل هذا لا يمكنك أن تقبل إجابة عنه، ولكن تنتظر منا فعل ذلك بدون تردد.
Mais qu'est-ce qu'elle a la petite dame? Il n'y a pas de quoi s'emballer comme ça.
Elle dit que vous n'avez aucune honte et qu'elle ne voit pas le rapport avec le sujet. Pourquoi vous posez des questions comme ça? Pourquoi vous parlez de sujets tabous? On est des êtres humains, on a une dignité, un certain sens de la décence, voyons.
Vous avez tous accepté de participer à un atelier sur la ménopause. Vous saviez qu'on allait parler de ça.
يقول أننا قبلنا الكلام معه على اكتئاب الكبير وعلينا أن ننتظر هذه موعد.
ولكن ماذا يحكي هذا؟ النقبة ليس ممنوعا من المحرمات.
Nakba? Elle a dit la Nakba? Mais quel est le rapport avec la Nakba?
Elle dit que ce n'est pas tabou d'en parler.
Mais je n'ai à aucun moment parlé de la Nakba. Je parle de la ménopause, la fin des menstrues. Et puis les tabous, il faut bannir. Ça tue la société. Et c'est pour ça d'ailleurs que vous êtes en retard par rapport à nous.
It was a very good clip. Again, I think, Maysoon, because there's, again, a lot of ideas in there that we can discuss. So what did you think triggered you the most? I mean...
Can I tell you the story of the menopause?
Yes, indeed. And there's also a question coming up by a colleague, but we'll take it on after you have told us the story.
Okay, so it's just... you know, in the 2000s, there was a wave of like, you know, not doing ethnographic research the way we do it usually. And they started to, people who are progressive started to experiment with different methods. One of them was the participatory research, right? So, and then through one of the public health Princeton University researcher, because she didn't want to do the research because it's problematic, you know, the subject, the researcher's research, and she decided to do this like a participatory research. She came through the NGO, of course. At first, she wanted to do HIV/AIDS, and then so the NGOs brought her kids. They were like people I was my friend working with, and then they were like 14, 15 years old, and she started to talk about HIV/AIDS, and there was like, you know, silence in the room, and nobody really cooperated with her. And she left, and then she decided that, you know, this is a taboo, and she doesn't want to talk to, like, the young people are scared to talk, or like, you know, culturally they don't want to talk about it because it's a taboo, and they don't want to talk about sexual interaction and so on. The fact that there was a zero, like simply zero HIV/AIDS in the camp, and it wasn't like something they are interested in or want to talk about. She left, and then she came up with the idea of like, oh, okay, so I want to teach about the menopause, so study and teach, like participatory research. So the NGOs brought the woman now, like not the young people, they brought the woman, and she started to teach them. So I was like curious, and so I used to follow the researchers, not because I wanted to study them, but it was like something I don't know, I was volunteer. So she brought the woman, and I was there the first meeting, and she started to tell them like, you know, we are going to study the menopause. And in Arabic, menopause is they called it the Great Depression, or it is age of despair, like, you know, the literary translation. The age of despair this, the age of despair that. So the woman, one of the women said it's 48 for, she told her, oh, 48. So yes, different women have it at different ages. She told her, no, all Palestinians have it at 48. So the age of despair of all Palestinians is 48. And then so the woman, and then another woman told her, oh, or 67. So it's either 48 or 67. And so the researcher was like taken aback, not knowing what is going on. So I was really aware that there are two different nakbas going on in the room. So I told her, maybe you need to translate what you mean by the age of despair. And you are talking about the end of menstruation. It is not about the despair of political despair of Palestinians. There is a political despair and the individual despair going on here. So she explained to them what does that mean, and they did, like, you know, blew up in her face, and then, you know, cursed her and cursed the NGOs and the popular committees that allowed her to ask such questions, and, you know, and then, but it wasn't about taboo, actually. It was more about like, who cares about what happens to our bodies? We have more important things to think about. And they were saying that, you know, one of them said, like, you know, my menstruation ended, I thought that I was pregnant, because, you know, it's not something that, you know, maybe a woman used to think about as upper class, middle class, urban women think about. And then we know that later that it is some sort of a construction. And this brings us to so many questions.
Yes, indeed. Well, first of all, let us return to the first part of your answer or your reflection. So this was basically a research carried out by people who thought of themselves as being very progressive, but what they they think that they were doing by introducing that theme. If they want to, promote participation of the people of the camp, they should presumably, I would guess, talk about issues that the participants think is important to them.
Yeah, well, this is what we know about participatory research, right? So this is one of the pillars of participatory research, that at least a question should come from the community. But what happens in most of the time is that you are interested in a topic and you bring people and you want them to participate, and it becomes really tiring because it's like an interview is easier. And they used to tell me this, like, we want to go back to the old research method. We don't want this anymore. Because then in the interview, you just go and then you talk for an hour and then bye-bye. So for this, you have to commit for 3-4 months until the progressive researcher who is decolonizing research think that this is enough material for her or him to write the dissertation. So so this is like a real problematic way of doing participatory research. Not to say that participatory research is going to liberate or overcome all the problem of ethnography, but it's just like imposing our questions on the researcher and not not following the field. And by the way, if she had really listened to what they were saying about the menopause, she would have had like a groundbreaking. We all do groundbreaking research in academia. Groundbreaking research in the sense that she would have questioned the whole construction of how women feel in menopause. And it was like years later in 2005 when the first book was written on the Japanese agricultural peasant woman, that they never felt the menopause. And then the author was arguing that it was constructed by the pharmacologist and it wasn't like something that women felt all the time. And it's not a universal thing for all women across class, ethnicity, and so on. So yes, imposing the question is something that researchers did, whether they were ethnographer or participatory researchers. Yes.
Mm-hmm. And you also talked about the idea of decolonizing research. What does that mean to you?
Well, I think the way they thought of decolonizing was like, if you change the method, then it is okay. So there is a bit of fetishizing of methods. That are certain methods that are liberating, and then other methods that are oppressive. And this is true for all sorts of, situation, and which is really not the case. There are certain questions that, all methods can be liberating and can be, if we do research that is meaningful to the community, if we are not like extractive researcher, but like genuinely that there is a genuine partnership between the research and the research, right? So like changing the method is not decolonizing. Decolonizing is looking at all these structures of power between us and the research in so many ways. Yeah, maybe we can talk about this later.
Well, can solidarity, the concept of solidarity, help there in creating a better environment for that kind of research? And our colleague Iman Leshkar also asked the question how you conceive of solidarity within your own research.
I mean, solidarity means, how do I feel of solidarity? Like, by speaking up against injustice, basically. Like when we are using our knowledge or our research to challenge status quo that aren't in favor of people we care for or causes we care for, usually. If you call this solidarity, then yes, it is like partnership. And then, when we are doing such sort of research, we shouldn't be like, maybe our question or research can help communities more, that if it is done not in the community and asking the poor and exposing them, but perhaps as researchers, we have the tools and we have access for information that might help this community in so many ways, right? Or so, solidarity in the sense of like, you know, having the same cause of challenging status quo, yes, can be part of decolonizing, but we also need to think about the whole political economy of research production in the sense of like, okay, why am I doing the research? Is it for my career? I am also connected to the university, and the university is connected to all these like relations of power, and is my research, the questions I am asking, serving the community or are serving, I don't know, the funder? Or so there are all these questions beside only the solidarity that needs to be put on the table when we are thinking of solidarity.
Thank you, Maysoon. That's indeed a very big agenda, and I'm quite sure that we'll have the opportunity to pick it back up. But of course, solidarity, as important as it is quite different from what we see sometimes, like overexposure, which is tied to a more hypocritical form of promotion, self-promotion of NGOs, etc. And this might be a good point then to turn to our third clip. Because it also deals with an extra aspect of the problematique. Let's watch our. Again, I think a video clip that doesn't need any words to convey a very strong message, I think, and also relates to something that you witnessed when you were in the camp. I also see, by the way, il y a une question de notre collègue Nadia Fadil. C'est une très bonne question, mais on va la prendre dans le dernier segment parce que c'est tout à fait le thème du dernier clip qu'on va voir plus tard. Yes, Maysoon, like I said, a very strong message, I think, without the use of words on the image. and something that you also witnessed, I think, in the camp.
Yeah, okay. So, you know, the phenomena of child star was prominent. I think because I lived for so long in the camp, so I could see the fall and rise of the stars and what does that mean in the community. But usually they are like cute kids who are very articulate and very expressive and smart. For the films, they have to be photogenic. So besides this, for the researcher, it's okay. So they are usually spotted by the NGOs. So again, so the NGOs spot like, you know, this kid is really, you know, good for promoting certain issues. And then, so they are spotted by the NGOs and they become like part of, invaded by researcher. And again, you know, subject to so many studies because they are the stars. So what happens is they start to take them like outside of the camp. Like if you have a film on the children, and then they start to take them to channels to speak, media attention, so much media attention, and promises also, like promises and so on. One of them was a really good. He had a great voice, and he was promised that he had to be a singer, and singing was his way out of the community he was living in. But because I lived for so long, so I saw the fall and rise, and what does that mean for the psychology of the children, and not only for them, but also for issues we think about. So like, for example, many of them, besides like having anxiety, because when they are a teenager, usually it's like the three of them I know, like from 7 to 14, 15, they become the not fun teenager, you know, that and then if they are not cute anymore, so they are left alone. And this causes like so much anxiety, and it's not only anxiety, but they feel also like, you know, abandoned, lied at. There are left alone, you know, broken promises, all these things, and suddenly, like we saw at the end of the clip, they come back to a reality that, you know, they escaped from for a while by being a star. It was like a false escape, but it was like an escape for them in so many ways. Like sometimes they would take them out of school to go for TV interviews and so on. But this is not only like, you know, what it means to them. By the way, the singer, when he was left, and he started to try to attract so much attention, and then he got really frustrated, and there was a real like suicide attempt at that time. So it's not like something we really need to take seriously. Well, maybe, you know, the researchers and the children feel that it is beneficial for both, you know, they are playing with the kids and so on, but there are so many other consequences, not only on that child, but on the other children. So by default, if you are deciding that this is a cute kid whose voice needs to be heard, so you are disempowering other children who feel like, you know, they have nothing to say. Maybe they have so many things to say, but you are also creating jealousy, frustration, and jealousy, frustration, and so on. But it's also like, you know, when we talk about the children woman trope, that, you know, when we talk about children as if it is okay for adults, so we are undermining the rights of adults in so many ways. So as if like when we focus all our attention and our gaze to tell our stories and bring sympathies from the world to the community by focusing on children, so like we are undermining in so many ways the rights of adults. I think this happened with Aylan story, you remember, with the Syrian kid who was found on the beach. So it was all about, and then this was the beginning of what we call the refugee crisis, and they welcomed refugees because it was a kid, and you know, what that means in terms of sympathizing. But the right winger, I mean, in Germany and elsewhere, their response was like, this kid is going to grow to be a terrorist. So like, you know, when we are like really focusing on the children, we are undermining so many other causes. Like, why, first of all, if you want to shed light on a cause, why focus on children only? And then also, like, you know, we have to be aware about the effect, besides the effects of researchers on the community, in the sense of creating this clientelist relation between the NGOs and the research and so on. We have to be aware of what does that mean when on the psychology of children when we focus so much on them, and what does it mean for solidarity, if you want to call it. Mm-hmm.
Yes, I mean, I think when you refer to this phenomenon of child stars,
yeah.
I presume that these are more the work of NGOs than of researchers who most of the time don't have the resources to make stars to begin with. So it's more from the NGOs, of course. Or do you see a link there too?
Yeah, well, it is like, so I told you, they usually are spotted by the NGOs. So the NGOs see, like, you know, a cute kid, pretty, like, you know, cute, smart, very articulate, can talk. So in a way, they make the child an ambassador. And then, you know, so like, you know, reflecting on the stories back, so he or she becomes an ambassador, and then also it's unfair because they are also burdening the child of speaking for the camp. So one time, one of them, after when he stopped being the cute star kid and became the ugly teenager, left alone and abandoned, he told me, like, you know, they kept on asking him to take the researcher or journalist or whoever he is talking to the same exact building in the camp to take picture of, which was like the building that was left from the war of the camp, and it was destroyed, and it was still, like, you know, a skeleton of a building. And then when he started to come back to his reality and to himself and feel grounded in himself again after so much work with his friends, he told me, actually, I like the camp. Like, you know, why we are always asked to focus on that building. I took, like, I don't know how many journalists to that building and talked about the camp from that building. And I have, like, there are spots in the camp that I used to take them to. But I love the camp in so many ways. I love my friends in the camp now. I don't want to leave anymore, or like go to the stardom of the TVs. I love, like, you know, because the camps were really small, and then the building, so the houses were really tight. So he would sit on his window and talk to his friends at night, like, you know, at night. So there are so many things in the camp they love, but they couldn't talk about because, as you said, they were directed to talk about certain issues. And it is also the NGOs that direct them to talk about certain.
Well, it's obvious that this is a very intrusive way of trying to do something. And of course, you see these stars rising and then disappearing again, like you said, because the cute children grow up and become less attractive teenagers. But perhaps there's also another issue, is that sometimes camps are in à la mode. When, for example, after the war in the camps, etc., people focused on the Palestinians, but then something happens, a big war and another disaster a few thousand kilometers away in Afghanistan, for example, and you see the whole business, I would say, of joint effort of NGOs and researchers flocking to the other side and just disappearing from Beirut and the camps.
Or also, like, it can be this way, what we call like war chasers, or like misery chasers, and then this is also coming from where the fund comes sometimes, and then, you know, but it can be also in the same camp. So, like, for example, when the Syrian refugee crisis happened, so many Palestinian Syrians came and stayed in the camp in Shatila. And so the researchers, because so much of the fund was tailored to the Syrian refugees, and they became the N refugees, not anymore the Palestinian refugees, there was so much research done on the Syrian refugees. And so the Palestinian Syrian refugees, because they came and stayed in Shatila. So at that time, what happened, it was really interesting because like nobody was asking the Shatila, the Palestinian Shatila resident, the ones that who lived in Shatila forever. They were abandoned and not being asked any question. And they felt really upset at the situation that like, now we are like, everybody is going to the Syrian, nobody is even asking us any questions. So it can happen also in the same locality. It doesn't have to be across the ocean.
No, indeed. So the flow of the funding and thus also of attention and research is tied to specific interests, where the money is coming from. And money is actually indeed, whether we like it or not, part of the reality of research and of NGOs. And I think we can now watch the fourth and final clip of tonight, which addresses that issue very directly.
Shukran. Ah oui. Merci beaucoup pour votre précieuse aide. Sans vous, je ne sais même pas comment nous aurions pu avoir toutes ces informations.
Mais ça fait avec plaisir. Mais bon, maintenant qu'on en parle, ce serait bien qu'on fixe quelque chose. En fait, on n'a pas encore eu l'occasion de parler de la rémunération et du montant pour mon travail. Et je comprends, vous êtes arrivé un peu vite, on a commencé directement à travailler. Mais maintenant que le moment du départ commence à s'approcher pour vous, ce serait bien qu'on puisse fixer ça avant que vous ne soyez complètement assaillis par l'administratif et valide.
Écoutez, oui, le paiement... Je comprends bien. Donc, écoutez, vous avez fait un travail exceptionnel de traduction. Ça, sans aucun doute, nous vous en sommes reconnaissants. Par contre, pour le paiement, nous n'avons pas prévu ça à la base parce que, vous savez, jusqu'à aujourd'hui, aucune traductrice nous a demandé de l'argent. Et puis, on fait ça pour votre camp et pour améliorer votre situation.
Pardon ?
Mais ne vous inquiétez pas. Dès notre retour, nous allons faire part de votre professionnalisme au centre de recherche. Puis, voir comment on peut, je sais... Avec le centre.
Donc vous croyez que vous pouvez venir ici et exploiter mon travail sans jamais me rémunérer?
Non, c'est absolument pas ça. Écoutez, premièrement, vous serez mis en valeur parce que vous avez été l'intermédiaire entre nous et les habitants du camp. Ensuite, vous serez une des premières personnes à lire le rapport final et nous donner votre avis parce que votre avis nous compte vraiment très cher. Et dernièrement, on va mentionner votre nom dans les journaux et les articles.
D'accord, excusez-moi. Non, je vous parle d'argent. Je vous parle de rémunérer mon travail et vous me parlez de me citer je ne sais où. En Occident, tout travail mérite salaire. Mais quand vous venez ici, vous vous attendiez à ce qu'on travaille gratuitement pour vous? Que les choses soient bien claires, ça ne m'intéresse pas de recevoir les résultats de vos recherches, je les connais par cœur et la simple idée d'avoir à les lire m'effraie. C'est toujours pareil en fait avec vous les chercheurs. Vous venez en prétextant vouloir nous aider en nous donnant la parole. Une vingtaine au moins de chercheurs se sont succédés avant nous et ont donné la parole aux réfugiés. Les voix des réfugiés ont été traduites en anglais, français, espagnol, suédois, mais seulement sur des sujets qui vous intéressent vous, en fonction de vos dernières lubies occidentales.
Non, ce n'est vraiment pas ce que vous pensez. Notre but est sincèrement de venir vous aider.
Ah ouais, d'accord. Donc je suppose que c'est un hasard si il y a encore quelque temps les chercheurs affluaient dans nos camps et qu'aujourd'hui ils vont presque tous voir les Syriens. Je sais très bien que dès qu'une population ou une situation est à la mode, vos institutions dégagent de l'argent pour pouvoir effectuer des recherches sur le sujet. Tout d'un coup, vous êtes nombreux à vous intéresser à un sujet dont vous n'aviez jusqu'à présent jamais entendu parler et encore moins étudié. Vous vous faites appeler sociologue ou anthropologue, mais vous êtes complètement déconnecté de la réalité de vos terrains. Et dès que vous en avez fini avec nous autres réfugiés, vous disparaissez et on n'entend plus jamais parler de vous. C'est incroyable. En fait, vous ne voyez en nous qu'une opportunité de faire carrière. c'est à se demander s'il existe encore des chercheurs, de vrais chercheurs.
Wow, a powerful message again. Well, Maysoon, are they still real researchers? Do they still exist?
Yeah, I think, you know, yes, it's not a code that all researchers are bad and all research is good. It is like what we do with our research, and there are like, you know, usually ideally in an ideal world, we want our research to challenge status quo when it is not good, and then to work together in not in an extractive, exploitative way, as we saw in the film, the research and researcher together working for something, solidarity, if you want to call it. Is there still like good research? Yeah, there can be good research, but we need to ask about, like, you know, there are the different parts of the research and our relation to that. So the questions we are asking, why we ask certain questions and not ask others, right? And then we are all product of a certain academic, we're product of academia and academia today. And so we need to keep asking, like, why we ask the question we ask, why don't we ask other questions? Why do we always need to study the poor and marginalized? Maybe if we study the rich, there are more things to learn from, right? So, and then there is also the process of doing research. And by the process of doing research, we really need to be aware of not only our positionality, which becomes like, okay, you just, you know, go to the camp, do participatory research, like impose this question and then talk about the relation of power. It's not about that. It is about like, you know, paying, while in the community, paying attention to the relation within the community. We are reinforcing or creating the categories we are creating, because also, like, you know, with the story of Ahmed, when I said she wanted people to ask about her being a fighter. Everybody wanted to ask about her refuginess. She was like, for herself, she was a revolutionary woman. Why are they focusing on her identity as a refugee? So in the process also, we are creating certain categories. Amongst them is the category of refugee. So, and then what does that mean when we are keeping on asking the same question? And also, like, creating identity of, like, Nakba and ongoing Nakba, because it's either 48 or the ongoing. So the process is really important of what we do when we are doing research, the category we create, also the category of children, also, and the drop of children of women. But it's also the kind of research we do, like, you know, when we place our focus. Sometimes it's more helpful for a community, as I said, to focus on issues outside of the community that can help more. There is an issue of impact, right? So why are we doing what we are doing research? Is it like only for my career, or do I want something from it? It's okay. I mean, like, you know, I'm not utopian. We all are, you know, turning the research into an industry, and the corporatization and financialization of research created all these political economy of knowledge production at different levels that we need to be aware of when we are doing research, and we need to be aware of our embeddedness in this political economy of knowledge production, not only what we do to the researcher. Then yes, of course, we can do great research still.
Thank you, and I tend to agree, Maysoon, but I want to push you a little bit on one issue, because you might have these strong ethical commitments and be aware of the political economy and financialization and this and that. But then there's still the question remains. For example, in the clip we just saw, there is very clearly a research assistant helping the researcher with translating, with presumably also giving access and this and that. I think, you know, she has a good point that her work needs to be paid. Otherwise, it could be seen as a form of exploitation, like she says. But there is a second question that I want to add to that. There is indeed a tendency, and it was also remarked on the chat by a colleague of ours, that there is indeed a tendency that more and more people are asking money to be interviewed. That if you want an hour of my time that I will give you to answer your questions, you're going to pay me for that. How do we deal with these demands?
I think this is also coming from the financialization of research, because, if you are taking, which is true, there are millions, sometimes a researcher can take millions of pounds, I'm speaking of British academia, to study the refugees. Okay, so since the refugee, research has become, or refugee studies, let's say, has become an industry, right? So there are these work relations that we need to be aware of, right? So it's not like if we just think that we are colonial, like in the clip, that you can go extract what you want and just give promises. This is in a way a colonialist attitude, that the people are happy to give us whatever we want while not paying them anything. And then they are aware now that research is not going to change their condition. And there is no cause, like before, the solidarity cause, that you take the people who are coming in solidarity and you build a movement. So there is nothing like that. So going to the field and knowing that we work within an industry, and there are all sorts of labor being put either by the gatekeepers or the research assistants, or even the people who are putting. So I think it is fair to pay these research assistants and so on. Whether we pay for interviews, I think this is I don't know how to answer this, but it's like more an alert for us that our research has become so financialized that people don't want to give us any time unless they take money in return, right? So maybe we should think about this. And I don't know, the financialization of research and the research industry and certain communities have created so much damage that, it is hard for research to be done without all these packages of the industry and the perception of the industry. Do I pay? I don't know. I mean, if you are taking paid money, it's labor, and we think about it as labor relation. So maybe, it's fair to pay. I don't know, but it's also a problem of, is it ethical to pay, or is it ethical not to pay, right? Because also there are, I don't have answer to these things. I'm not an expert. I'm thinking with you, basically.
Yes,
yeah.
likewise.
Yeah, we are all trapped, and I don't know any answer for this. Do I pay people money? I mean, it's going to create other relations that might not be great to the camp, but if we admit that we work within a financialized research, then it's more a call for me to think about what financialization of research has done to the relation of us to the communities we study.
Yes, but it might be also very difficult then if you go back and you want to do your research old school and from a very high standard of ethical concerns, etc. But then you want to try to talk to people and they know that others pay for it. They're going to say, why should I talk to you?
Well, yeah.
The other people pay me for an hour of my time.
I think we have ethical duties now to speak up against the financialization of research in our own institutions, because this is what is otherwise we are going to be put in the situation you are talking about. I mean, do we need millions of pounds to do research on impoverished communities and employ all these, research assistants in dire need for work and exploit them in so many ways? I don't know. So this is also, we have ethical duties to start thinking about the broader implication of the financialization of research and the perception of researchers when we go abroad because of all the financialization that is going on.
True. Very true. And it's, of course, a very big question that, alas, we won't be able to answer tonight. A discussion that needs to be followed up upon, I am quite sure. And I know it's a cliche, but it's true that when someone is having fun, time flies and goes so fast. I just want to ask now, au public, est-ce qu'il y a des questions, des remarques que vous avez? Est-ce que vous voulez intervenir? Il y a encore plein de... Okay. Yes, we can take that question again, Maysoon, that Iman asked a little bit earlier.
How does solidarity go?
Yes.
Oh, okay. I think like when I focus on the political economy of research, I think I'm speaking up against all these power relations, not only at local level, but at local and local national level, and then also like the relation of global south to the global north, because in so many ways we are still operating in a colonialist setting of research, global north going to global south, universities in the global north, and then we are situated in that, whether we are from that part of the world or not. I think despite my solidarity is in a way speaking up to power. I don't promise the community anything, but I'm trying to push in so many ways of thinking about the politics and ethics of research and the political economy of knowledge production against the financialization of research. So this for me is kind of solidarity, because in a way it is challenging and trying to make real change in the world we are operating in. I don't know if I answered, but I never studied the poor for some reason. So I think in all my studies have been studying up, which is also studying sideways and down. But when I'm studying the poor, I am speaking up also. I tell them that I am trying to unveil certain discourses, and I'm not promising anything about my research. So solidarity in a way that me and them are against certain practices that is affecting all of us, not only them. So this is my way of solidarity.
It's a very beautiful position. There's another question here for you, Maysoon. How have you changed your research practice to be more ethical and collaborative in your work?
Honestly, okay, before doing my PhD, I witnessed all these problems in Shatila, and in Beirut. And my first paper was anti-research, anti-ethnography for the anthropology class, that I felt this is all colonialist and so on. So I came across studying up that we don't need always to study the poor and marginalized. So I had a manifesto of anti-ethnography. But then I don't know if I changed my practice, but I think, as I said, I am very careful about the questions I ask, right? So it's starting, the question I am asking, who is it serving? Because I do believe that most, the research starts with a question, and I don't follow in topics. So, and then if there are in topics, I try to intervene and ask why they are in topics and how we are approaching them. So, so it's asking the question in more difficult way, perhaps more ethical ways, questions that are not going to extract knowledge that can be harmful to the communities. And how do I do collaborative work? I don't know. It's like to be more ethical and yeah. So this is like the ethics for me is like not taking funds is one. I'm not okay. So let me put it this way. I'm not against fund of all sorts. There are like, some fund that if it is like, let's say 50,000, buy me 1 year to study, fine. But like this big grants and the financialization and corporatization of the university and fund, I am not, I don't, ideologically, I'm opposed to that. Maybe in science, it's okay. But for social science, I will be a manager for money, exploit researcher and part of the industry. So a very ideological or ethical point for me is not to apply for big grants. So this is one way of doing it. Ask the question in different ways and challenge power when asking question, not like focus on my gaze on where power wants me to focus my gaze on. Yes.
Yes, indeed. And perhaps if I may soon, Annelies Moors on the chat, who's joining us from Amsterdam, added another aspect to the issue of financialization of research, and that it's more difficult to have long-time commitments, build up relationships, and invest in learning the language, etc. Is this also something that you feel is part of it? And I want to add another layer, perhaps, to this remark. You said that, for example, when we travel to the global south, we come from the global north. It's because we have, we work at an institution in the global north. But at the same time, you are Lebanese also. Does that make you or I, if I go to Tunis and you to Beirut, does that make us better researchers potentially?
I really don't believe in identity politics. Let me put it this way. There is no one like, and sometimes like, researchers from the global north take this as a way to push for themselves. And I'm really against this. So let me just like start by this. I'm not against, there are researchers from the global north who are more ethical than people who are working in Lebanon and are Lebanese, or the same for Tunisia. So to start with, this is off off the table here, right? Yeah. So there are also like yes, but also like the points that Annelie is doing is pointing out is really important also, because when you are, as I said, like when you take big grants, you become more of a manager for the fund rather than a researcher. So when you become manager to the fund, you don't know these people that you are writing about. And this is problematic in so many ways, because there is no, if solidarity comes, it comes because you are connecting to people, and there is no connection to people because of you are sitting somewhere bringing in the data. Well, let's not talk about the whole ethics of how this is done, not knowing the language, sometimes not even knowing the cause. We can be so many harmful in many ways. So no, I'm not saying that like we shouldn't be studying in different places. I'm more for, like, I belong to humanity more to than like, Lebanese or whatever. Yes, perhaps like being Lebanese has a lot of who I am, but also I don't use that as like pushing researchers away, because it becomes also, as I said, something that the more important thing is not our identity, but the questions we ask. If we are taking big grants, why we are doing the research, what's the purpose of our research, in whose interest, stuff like that are more important than where we are coming from.
Most definitely. And indeed, one of the issues that I think Annelies was also referring to, that a lot of these big grants, quite contradictory or paradoxically, need to move very fast. So you have sometimes teams of researchers and managers coming in, but they do everything, they write 8 months in Europe and 2 months or 3 months in field work, and that's it. So there's no long-term commitment to the community that you're studying. There's not a lot of investment, and a lot of times they are also sure of themselves that whatever type of research they're doing, that it's universal, so that they can just have this toolbox that they can use and deploy everywhere where they want.
Yeah, but there is also the issue is like, first, money is not doing better research. I've never read like these big grants research that I felt, wow, this couldn't have been done without like the millions of money that it's like, sometimes it's like, because it is written in a rush, there is no intellectual project. Like, so it's not, I have an intellectual project. These are the things I am interested in. So I have been working on similar topics for a while. I don't repeat myself, but at the same time, I know, like, when I started, there are so many things that I thought were, I don't know, like, were insightful. I don't think now, because, you gain knowledge and you have an intellectual project you build on. So there is always like, things you build on, and then you are committed. When you have an intellectual project, you are committed to a certain intellectual project besides commitment to a cause or to people or whatever. So this has all like disappeared with big grants. Well, let alone that these big grants are not gaining us any good research or more insights than my advisor used to say, money doesn't make good research. It's the questions you ask that make good research. So, yeah.
Indeed. Okay, I think we can take a final question, Maysoon, if you want.
Again, I am not an expert here, so
no.
I'm really thinking through these issues, and then I don't have any answer, but I'm just discussing with you. So yeah,
that's the whole idea, and we're enjoying it very much, or at least I am. So thank you very much. But yes, a remark of Joachim Ben Yacoub, how to know which research questions can support or serve or benefit the primary concerned community in the study, and which not. So besides the political economy and the financialization, then how can we make sure that the questions that we ask are the right questions to ask?
Well, I think listening is a good thing. Like, big grants, like you send people, you decide on the project because DFID decided on it, like, the Global Research Fund. When you are intellectually committed to a project long-term, you have an intellectual project you are committed in for long-term, you have like, these questions that come from when you are interacting with people, right? And then also like, you have the luxury because you are, you also knows how power works. So you have to ask the question at different levels. So like, the level of the macro and micro, and then not imposing question on the community you are studying if you are studying down, and so on. This is how, and then asking ourselves, why are we asking these questions too, is very important. So like when we are starting to think about a topic, like you always need to ask, like, why am I asking the question I am asking? Is it because, because of my long intellectual project, I think there is something that needs to be said in this direction, or because when I was working in this community, there were all these talk about this certain topic that need to be, elaborated. So, starting by asking ourselves why we are asking this question, and then being aware again, let the field make us ask the question in so many ways, and trying to avoid the end question that the funders want us to ask is a good way, a good start. I don't know. Yeah.
Indeed.
Sometimes, sorry, but like, when like my question are asked usually when things become hegemonic. So like, my research on youth, it is because youth has become a hegemonic category, and everywhere youth, Arab youth, Muslim youth, whatever, blah, blah, blah. So you have to ask yourself, okay, why is everybody interested in this category? And ask the question that are being asked about, question that are being asked. when it comes to use. The same with the grants, right? So why suddenly there are so many grants tailored to the Syrian refugees before they were to the Palestinian refugees? And like, who is tailoring this? So these are also questions that we can ask. We don't have to go all the time to do field research. Also, I'm not saying we shouldn't, but there are so many things that we can do by studying these sorts of questions.
Indeed. Thank you very much, Maysoon. I would gladly continue this talk, but I think it's now time to give back the floor to the conveners of this meeting. And I thank you very much for being with us tonight.
Thank you, and thank you very much.
Thank you, Maysoon.
Bye.
Hi again. Merci beaucoup, Sami. Merci beaucoup, Maysoon, pour cet échange très enrichissant. J'espère que le public a autant apprécié que nous, a apprécié l'échange, a apprécié les vidéos. C'était vraiment passionnant. Merci beaucoup.
But also thank you, Suhaila, and the whole team of Ras El Hanout for the amazing interventions. No? They were really on point. Maybe it's also good to thank Mariam Diallo and maybe also the whole collective, Camelia Bendodu, Miriam Bouaziz, Abgar Tumeisan, and Ayman Genau for the amazing work you put again in the artistic interventions.
Indeed, thank you very much. I also hope that we can use these clips even in the future and watch them again.
Yes.
On vous retrouve en tout cas pour la dernière session, la troisième et dernière session, avec Imen Lashkar et Shirin, j'ai oublié son nom de famille, mais en tout cas c'est le 1er avril.
Shirin Amir Moazami.
Voilà, exactement, merci. J'ai une mémoire parfois qui est pas top. Donc voilà, on vous retrouve le 1er avril, Inch'Allah, pour notre dernière session. Au revoir et merci à tous.
Au revoir, bye bye.
Bonne soirée.